Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is a walkthrough of setting up an Express server with Mongo. This is not a, Express 101 video. I'm not going to explain every detail of Express from scratch, but if you're still pretty new to Express and you're just trying to remember what all the steps are to setting up your Express server, this video will be kind of helpful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder. So let's do that. New folder. There we go. We're just going to call this Basic Express because we're just creating a basic Express server. I'm going to open this up in my terminal. First thing I'm going to want to do is touch a server.js. And I'm going to make a bunch of folders. Make dir, controllers, models, DB for our database connection. And I'm also going to be using Mongo in this video. Okay. Be a similar process if you want to use one of the many ORMs on Node to connect to, let's say, an SQL database of some sort, whether it's SQLize, Next with objection, or type ORM. There's a whole bunch of them. So I'm going to make dir a controllers folder, a models folder, a DB folder, a public folder, and we'll leave it at that. Okay, cool. So first things first, let's do an npm init -y so that way we have a package.json. Good, there's our package.json file. Then we're going to install all the dependencies we're going to need for this. So that's going to be Express, because that's going to be our backend framework. We need cores, because we want to set up the cores middleware, because if we build an API, we want to make sure that people can make requests to our server. Okay, npm I express cores. We want Morgan because we want logging, so we want to be able to keep track of like server logs. We want we want Nodamon because we want to have a development script. Although I'll probably install that separately as a dev dependency. Okay, express cores Morgan. What else do I want? I want JSON Web Token. I'm not going to be getting into JSON Web Tokens there, but supposedly you would probably want to build authentication using JSON Web Token, and you want to encrypt passwords using bcrypt.js or bcrypt.js. You'd want to install. I feel like I'm missing something. Let's start with that. And then we'd also, we want to install Mongoose because we need to connect to our database. And we're going to want to install .env for the purposes of our environmental variables. So let's install those two. And we're going to want to install npm I save, I think it's --save-dev Nodamon, because Nodamon will never be used in production. It's not to actually run our server. It's just going to allow there to be a watcher while we develop our server. So that way it automatically restarts our server instead of us having to manually do so. So there we go. We've installed our dependencies. So if I've done that, in my folder I should see all those folders that I've made, including this node modules folder that Node made for me with all my dependencies. And in there I see a server.js, it's empty, and a package.json that should have all my dependencies. So if you want, you can pause that for a second, make sure that all your dependencies match mine. Okay, next thing I want to do is I want to touch a .env file and a .gitignore file. Okay, the .env file is where we're going to put all our sensitive variables. The first variable we're going to put is port, and port will equal 3000. The reason, while port's not a particularly sensitive detail, you put it in there because the way most hosts like Heroku will pass, you don't know what port they're going to send your application to, so you leave it as an environmental variable, and Heroku will pass the port to your application. But if your application doesn't have that, it doesn't already accept that variable, it won't receive it. Okay, so that's why you can't hard code the port for purposes of deployment. Okay, and then we'll come back to other variables. Our git ignore is where we list things that we do not want git to commit. Okay, we want git to ignore these particular files for now, which is always going to be the node modules folder and the .env folder. Okay, you always want express or git to ignore those things because again, these are sensitive variables. The whole point is that when we deploy this, we're going to have a separate set of environmental variables set up wherever we deploy. So on Heroku, there's a section called config vars where you set that up. The .env is the variables we need working locally only on our computer. They shouldn't be on GitHub where everybody else can like get our database URLs or API keys and other sensitive data. So with those two, and I don't know what this is, so I'm going to delete that. Okay. There we go. Okay. And okay. So we have all that set up. So now we can start setting up our server. That's going to be in server.js. And the first thing you always want to do is import your dependencies. Okay. I'll make this a little bit colorful. There we go. I have an extension called Better Comments that allows me to do that. Okay. Cool. So for our first dependency we want to import is Express. Actually, even before Express, we should always bring in the environmental variables first, because you want to make sure that all those variables are defined right away. Because if you were to like require it after some line of code that refers to one of those variables, you'd have an error. So the best way to make sure you're not going to run into those kind of errors is if you bring in those environmental variables before anything else happens. So we're going to do require. We're going to require .env. .env has a function inside of it called config that we're going to run, and that does all the things, and that sets everything up. Nice. Then we can bring in express, const express equals require express. And again, using express, we need to use the function to create an app object, const app equals express. While we're at it, let's bring in Morgan, const Morgan equals require Morgan. Let's bring in cores. Cores const I don't think I need anything else yet. Let me just double check my dependencies. Morgan, Mongoose, not yet. JSON web token, nope, 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 nope. Everything else is good. Okay, cool. So those are our dependencies. Then what we want to do is set up our middleware. Now the first middleware should always be cores, because the idea is that if someone is not supposed to access your server, you want to block them right away. Now to use a piece of middleware, you have to do app.use, and then inside there you pass a function. In this case it'll be cores. Now when I pass cores with an empty parentheses, what's going to happen is that's going to mean everybody can just access our server. So there is no restriction. It's an open gate, which is fine during development. Okay, so a good way, if you want to make sure that when you finally move to production, that you do have like a whitelist, here's what I would do. Okay, so let's head over to the cores documentation. So let's go to npmjs.com. That's where we can find all the npm libraries and look up the cores library to read its documentation. And what you want to do is set up the configurations. I usually use this one right here. So I'm just going to copy this part right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new folder called config. So I'm just going to use this for any kind of miscellaneous configuration type things to do in there. Why? Just because I don't want to make this file more cluttered than I have to. So I'm just going to make a new file here called cores.js, and then I'm going to paste that, and then just module.exports equals cores options. Okay, and basically what this is that this array here is a whitelist of URLs that are allowed to make API calls to your API. No other URLs are allowed to. So you want to make sure you update that once you know what your front end URL is. And then this just makes that work. This just actually checks to make sure that the URL coming in is one of those URLs. I wouldn't think too hard about it. But we export that, and then we would import that into our server.js. I'll say const cores options equals require dot slash config slash cores. Cool. So that's good. Now I still really want cores to be empty to just kind of let anybody make requests while I'm in development, because you can't really put like a local host on your whitelist. It just doesn't work for some reason. So you just really want the door wide open when you're doing development locally. So a standard convention, okay, is that you have a variable called node env, and that's going to equal a production or development. I think typically Heroku by default will pass in production. You can always explicitly state it. I'm going to explicitly state that when we're working here locally, that we're in the development environment. Okay? So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a ternary operator. So I'm going to say if process, because all the environmental variables always end up in the process.env object. So if process.env, actually let's make it cleaner. A good habit to do is just to destructure all your necessary environmental variables right away. So let's just put an object here. I'm going to need port from there because that's one of our environmental variables. I'm going to want node env from there. And where from where? Process.env. It's just less typing. So then I say if node env equals production. So if we're in production mode, then we will use cores with cores options passed in, which means we'll use the whitelist. Anything not on the whitelist gets blocked. But if that is not true, then just use cores with the empty parentheses, which means anybody can make a request. And then that's how you make it. You know, you don't have to think about it. When you're in production mode, the whitelist is on. When you're in development mode, the whitelist is off. Then you just have to make sure that you update your whitelist later once you know what your front-end URL is. So that's cores, all nice and set up. Okay, then we want to use our logger, app.use. Actually, we probably want to use, no, yeah, that's fine. App.use Morgan, and I always just set up with tiny. There's a variety of different options. You can go find them in the Morgan documentation. App.use. I'm assuming that you're going to be building an API. So you want to be able to parse JSON bodies. So we need express.json. Just in case, let's set up a static server. App.use express.static. And then usually what you do is you have it serve the public folder. So it just serves the public folder in case you need to serve like a static HTML file or something. Okay, app.use. Express.json, Morgan tiny, cores options, cores. And I think we're pretty okay for now. Then we'd have a section for our routes. I'll just copy and paste this little header thing. Okay. Routes. And then we'll have our listener. App.listen. and then we'll listen on port, and then we'll pass in a callback function that console.logs. We're going to use backticks for interpolation, and we are saying listening on port. Okay, and then that's there. We have our server set up. So right now we have no routes. That's fine. Next, we want to do is set up some scripts. Package.json. Oh, that's a different app, so let's close that. Package.json. Here we go. I want to set up. I always like to set up two scripts. Start. That's going to be node server.js, and then I want to do dev, which will be nodamon server.js. I will. Well, yeah, no, it should be fine. So save. There we go. And now let's test it out. So I'll just type in npm run dev. So I'm run the dev script. Oh, something I did wrong. Express.state. Ooh, I spelled static wrong. So express.static. Okay, now it's running. So let's open this. Cannot get. Okay. So first let's make a basic root route just to test the route, but we see that our server's working, so that's good. So app.get / res res.send hello world. Okay, so now if I refresh the page, I get hello world. Okay, so this res.send is working. Good. Now I just want to show you what this static folder does. So essentially what this does, it makes it where our public folder serves files statically. So if I put an index.html here, so if I were to put an index.html here, and let's say just put some HTML boilerplate here, and now over here I'll put h1 hello world 2. Okay, what's going to happen is that once it gets to that piece of middleware, it's going to see if there's anything in the public folder that would theoretically match the URL. Public folder is treated like slash, okay? And then again, in a folder, the default is always index.html. There's an index.html that represents the folder. So in that case, it'll probably hit this first. It'll find the index.html and serve that, so it'll never actually get to this route. So if I refresh this, I should get hello world 2. And see, that's what we got. Okay? And now now this route will never get hit because the static server serves it up separately. And if I were to go in this folder and make a new folder called cheese, and then I were to copy this index.html, paste, and then let's just change that to hello world 3. Okay, see, hello world 2 this is still hello world 2, but if I go to /cheese, again, now it's going to look inside the public folder for a folder called cheese, and by automatically, it'll automatically do an index.html file there if there is one. So that's I get hello world 3. So that's what the static folder does. It's usually used for like if you need a few static HTML pages throughout your site. If you're serving, like if you're building an API, you really don't need to serve anything here because you have a separate application that's providing you. But you might want to do documentation for your API here or something like that. You can do that. It's there. It's a thing you can do. Okay, so that's established. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete these index.html files because I don't want them overwriting my routes. Okay. And let's see here. Next, we want to set up our database connection. So, not a bad idea to start off with your production server. Well, no, to start off with a remote server because you can create multiple ones. So we want to get our MongoDB URL. So I'm going to actually expand this. Let's log in. Nope. So we have logged in. Now, last I checked, if I remember right, I created a temporary user, so I need to still create a new user. So if you don't have an account like this on MongoDB.com, get a MongoDB.com, create a new cluster. All the defaults are fine. Then you're going to head over to database access and create a user. So I'll create a new user in a second. You're going to go to network access, make sure that you have all IPs whitelisted. Okay. Or else, you know, your request won't come in, right? Okay, I'm going to create a user. I'm just going to create a temporary user for the purposes of showing this. So we're going to call we'll call it test. That's the username and password. And I'm going to make it a temporary user. So this user will only be good for 6 hours. Okay. Cool. So now I'm going to go back to my clusters. And I want to get my connection URL. So I click on connect. I click on connect your application. It's a Node.js application, so I just copy this URL here. And I'm going to go back to my .env and paste that URL in there. So we'll just call it MongoDB URI equals, and there it is. So I need to replace parts of this. So I need to replace this username with my user, which is test. I need to replace this password here with my password, which is test. I need to, and then replace this DB with my database name. We'll call this dev1. Okay, and then you can, when you put this same URL over there on Heroku, you can call it prod. So that way you have a separate production database. That's the beauty of Mongo. All you have to do is just change that part of the string and you have a different database. Nice. Cool. So now that we have that set up, we can now begin setting up our database. So on our database folder, we'll create a con for connection.js. And here, I'm going to bring in Mongoose. So const mongoose equals require mongoose. And what we need to make sure we have our require .env .config. That way I have my environmental variables. And then we're going to destructure those environmental variables. So that should be const MongoDB URI equals process.env. So there we go, we have that. And then I need a config object, const config equals an object that says use new URL parser, true, use unified topology. And the only reason I know this is because I've done it so many times now. Topology, true. You can do, if you don't remember what they are, what you can do is you can just do it without it, and Mongo will tell you what it needs to be in those deprecation warnings. So it's, again, you don't need to memorize those. Okay. Cool. Now we just do our connection code. Connect to Mongo. Nice. So that's going to be mongoose.connect, it's a function, and it takes in the URI, so it's MongoDB URI, and it takes in the config object, config. Then we want to create events, so that way we know we're connected. And those all revolve around the Mongoose connection object. So mongoose.connection is an event that represents the state of your connection, and you can use a .on function to create events. So .on, the event is going to be when the connection opens. What do I want to happen when the connection opens? I want it to say you are connected to Mongo. Okay. And then when the connection closes, I want it to say you are disconnected to Mongo, and when there is an error, that particular event gets passed an error object, and I want it to console log the error. Okay, so those are my events. Oh, I need like another parenthesis right here. Okay, and then once with that, we just export the Mongoose object. So module dot exports equals Mongoose. And then that's going to be what we import in server.js. So I go back to server.js, go back to my dependencies, let's add Mongoose. I'll add Mongoose after express const Mongoose equals require, but I'm not requiring Mongoose, I'm requiring ./db/con. I want to import the already connected version of Mongoose. And see, now I see you are connected. So there we go. Now I have a server that's running that is connected. And now I can begin building my API by creating a model, a Mongoose model, then creating controllers with the routes, and then connecting that router back to server.js. So yeah, this is how you do your Express boilerplate for Mongo and Express. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.